makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. It's been a pretty dramatic 24 hours in global geopolitics. Israel's war against Hamas comes to the Gulf. A surprise attack in the Qatari capital draws widespread condemnation. Here in Europe, a major escalation in Russia's war with Ukraine as Poland shoots down Russian drones in its territory as defense ministers meet here in London. Plus, France also has a new prime minister who faces the daunting task of pushing through unpopular budget reforms. We'll have, of course, expert coverage from reporters and analysts in Europe and the Middle East on the ground. And then in the U.S., a judge rules that the Fed's Lisa Cook cannot be fired for now. All of that global stock rallying powering ahead. So a lot to discuss with Mark Haefele, Chief Investment Officer at UBS Global Wealth Management. Mark, as always, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your busy schedule. It's just a lot. It's a lot of news to process, right? And so if you're on a trading floor or if you're an investor, Oracle getting 30%, does that translate into Fed expectations?
Well, I think that, one particular company, of course, doesn't. I think that the markets have kind of said how the Fed is going to go, and I don't think at this point they're going to contradict the market. So, we're expecting a cut, probably 2 this year and then more into next year.
Mark, geopolitics are on edge, right? So you wake up and you don't really know what you're going to read about at the moment, and we had 2 big pieces of news overnight. The markets seemingly ignore it. Is it right because they don't really know how to price it in, or does it show up in data at some point?
Well, we've talked about this many times over the years, and I think there is this issue of the market having really this inability to price in some of these geopolitical risks. But for us as investors, while the human tragedy is real, I think it's an exciting time as an investor because it plays to our strength, playing the whole chessboard across asset classes, because you do get these different moves now. It's not just an equity story.
So let's maybe start with the Fed rate cut. Mm-hmm. It's fully priced in. Is there any world where we have some kind of CPI number that actually derails it?
I don't think so at this point. I think that, the Fed with the dual mandate, looking at this labor market situation, they can do a cut and pay heed to that, and then maybe they do pause depending on what happens.
What are you expecting, 25 or 50?
We're expecting 25.
25 because and then they wait and see. Would it make more sense to go 50, go big, go bold, and then go home?
I don't think so.
How do you see the labor market, changing? And again, what does that mean for where you want to be invested in?
Well, I think that, there has been for a very long time these questions about how the labor market numbers are going to improve or not improve. But for us, we're more focused on tech. We have been and we remain that way, where these topics are probably less of an issue.
How do you, first of all, look at central bank independence? There was a judge, ruling on Lisa Cook. Again, the market at the moment is watching it, but also largely ignoring it.
Well, watching it, I think, makes sense. There's always been questions about how much can any agency move away from the political situation. But I think the Fed has been very well designed, given that it has a committee. And so that we don't think that that's an issue that is going to be topmost on investors' mind in a few months.
So, Mark, going back to tech, this is the big play probably supporting the U.S. economy almost on its own. Valuations, it's priced to perfection. Are valuations starting to get expensive, or can they go much higher?
Well, I think that we would expect that the growth of revenues and earnings is going to continue to power ahead. As we look through the stack of the investments, as we talk to our entrepreneurs who continue to find use cases for AI, see the savings, that gives us some confidence that there's some durability. Now, as we get into the fall and September can be a volatile month, can we get some more hiccups? Absolutely. But I think the longer-term trend remains intact.
We also see the Trump administration doing something, for example, with Intel, that 10%. There's, talk about revenue sharing. Is that noise, or does it matter to the bottom line?
Well, I think that how that all plays out, we still don't know. But I think if you take a step back and you say, what are the big problems that governments are trying to solve? And they tend to throw big money at big problems, and we tend to do well if we're kind of buying what the government's buying. That all feeds into the tech story because the president has said he will do whatever it takes to make sure America wins in the AI race. And I think investors would ignore that at their peril.
Do you prefer U.S. stocks to the rest of the world?
I think that, we like the tech stack globally. So obviously a lot of that is in the United States. But China tech remains undervalued, and there's considerable investment in China going in that direction. And then selectively in Europe, there are ways of playing tech.
So how do you play, stocks in general in Europe, also given some of the political turmoil?
Yeah, for us, Europe is not, as a whole, is not an overweight. We're very selective in Europe. So maybe Swiss dividend stocks and then high cash flow companies where we feel they have quality that can kind of endure some of the headwinds that remain.
What do you worry about, Mark? When you look at, so for example, the Prime Minister in France, this goes back to fiscal, right? And it could go back basically to the debt issuance in certain countries, including the U.S. Is that a worry longer term? Like, do you push that back to 2027, or do you start taking action now?
Well, I think what we've done over, say, the past 5 years is leaned more towards equities and away from long-dated bonds because, to your point, over the longer term, a lot of these situations are unsustainable. But if you look at France, for example, right now, France doesn't have any problem paying its shorter-term debt. So to the extent that the politics really starts to drive interest rates higher, we would probably see that as an opportunity.
Opportunity to buy what?
Well, to buy short-term debt, say, versus other European nations.
Is there anything that actually you've changed your mind on in the last 5-6 months that you don't want to buy anymore?
Well, I think that, getting a little more cautious, maybe a little more selective on the tech because it has run up so much. I think that, we spend a lot of time debating kind of across asset classes what to do, in FX and commodities. And I think for now, given some of these geopolitical tensions, there just continues to be this central bank push towards gold. So that's something we continue to think about.
Gold is I don't know whether it's expensive. It's certainly at record highs. Is it expensive yet?
I think that, we don't see tremendous upside from here, but, it comes in the context of as these events continue to unfold and as sanctions talk continues, there are investors who say, hey, with major currencies weaponized, what are the alternatives that I can go to?
But overall, you feel quite sanguine. You're pretty positive still about the markets.
Yeah, I think that, this core concern is, do we start to get people who are not getting the return on investment in the tech spend that they're doing? Or are investors really starting to question some of these massive CapEx infusions? But we haven't seen that yet.
So interesting. Mark, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Mark
you.
Haefele, their Chief Investment Officer at UBS Global Wealth Management. Now, coming up, Russian drones breach Polish airspace. Israel targets Hamas in Qatar, and France has a new prime minister in waiting. It's a huge day for geopolitics, so we'll have the latest next on the ground. This is Bloomberg. Well, let's dive deeper into the major geopolitical stories dominating the agenda this morning. For the latest on the Middle East, we'll speak to our Joanna Bersace. We'll also have expert analysis on France's political crisis with EY's Famke, Krumbmüller, and covering developments here in Europe is our Oliver Crook. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told lawmakers in Strasbourg, France, that, quote, Europe must fight to establish a place in a new global order that's become antagonistic to its values and approach to democracy. Well, her comments come after Poland shot down 10 Russian drones that violated airspace.
This must be Europe's independence moment. I believe this is our union's mission, to be able to take care of our own defence and security, to take control over the technologies and energies that will fuel our own economies, to decide what kind of society and democracy we want to live in.
Ollie, I mean, Poland shooting down drones that crossed into, territory from Russia is big. It's big news. Is this, an escalation, or is it a provocation?
Well, that's the big question, Francine, and how it's going to be interpreted by Europeans and Donald Trump alike will be sort of very relevant in figuring out what the correct response to this is going to be. We should say, Francine, that the significance of this, there have been missiles that have landed in Poland before and drones that have incurred into airspace. You'll remember, Francine, in the early days of the war in Ukraine, there was a missile that overshot Ukraine, landed in Poland, and there was a huge amount of anxiety around Europe and, the rest of the world saying, does this actually trigger Article 5? Is this actually the beginning of a full-scale war? That sort of calmed down quite a bit, but now go forward a couple of years later, now you have these sort of drones on a much higher scale going into Polish airspace, demanding that Polish airspace closes, that airports close, and what we understood, we heard from Ursula von der Leyen saying that more than 10 drones crossed over, and the reason that it's relevant, Francine, and why it's important and why it's different from every other time is this will mark the first time that there is direct engagement between NATO forces and Russian hardware. So the question is, what will the response be from Donald Trump? We have not heard from the administration yet. We've heard from a few lawmakers overnight from the United States, including Senator Dick Durbin, who says that this is basically the Russians trying to figure out whether or not NATO is going to be serious about whether or not it's going to sort of basically defend its eastern flank. We heard from another lawmaker in the United States saying that basically this is an act of war. I mean, regardless of whether or not by Putin this was a deliberate act or it's just relative indifference to kind of the threat of Article 5, this is a significant development for Russia, which has been upping its bombing campaign over the last couple of weeks to the highest level of any point in the war, and it will demand a response of some kind from the United States and from Europe.
Yeah, I mean, we know that, of course, President Tusk briefed the NATO Secretary General about the current situation. Do we know about any ongoing talks between them? Von der Leyen, the Commission President, also taking a pretty strong tone in the State of the Opening address.
Yeah, well, there was a cabinet meeting convened in Poland, and you can bet there's going to be meetings between defense ministers, foreign ministers all across Europe. There will be calls with Donald Trump. I mean, you'll also remember a sort of significant piece of context here. Donald Tusk, the prime minister, may not see as eye to eye with President Trump, but the president, the newly elected president of Poland, was just at the Oval Office very recently, and he got an assurance from President Trump, who is basically Trump, who is trying to sort of detract from the number of troops within Europe. Trump said that basically he's willing to commit more troops to Poland if they want them. Remember, there are about 10,000 U.S. troops stationed in Poland as a sort of deterrence factor as part of the sort of NATO architecture, and he said that he's willing to send more if the Poles would be in favor of that. So again, the key here is going to be how the United States responds. Does this now put more pressure on this initiative that we heard from overnight that Trump apparently wants the EU first to sanction China and India over their buying of Russian crude oil, and then the U.S. would follow? This will all sort of fold into the broader geopolitical discussions. We've got to say, Francine, over the last 48 hours, to say nothing of the last 2 weeks, where we see, Vladimir Putin being sort of invited out of the cold by Modi and Xi Jinping. It's a big sort of geopolitical calculus for the Europeans and the U.S. to make now.
Yeah, the Prime Minister Tusk, I need to correct myself. Prime Minister Tusk also, I think, speaking to reporters, saying that Poland shot down 3, possibly 4 drones. He says some drones came to Poland from Belarus. Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there with the very latest on the situation. Now to the Middle East and Israel's unprecedented attack against Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital, Doha. The strike has drawn rare public criticism from President Donald Trump and underscored the risk that the war in Gaza could get worse before it gets better. Well, the U.S. President Donald Trump said he learned of the attack too late to stop it.
I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation. But I will say this, we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today.
Did he notify you in advance, Mr. President? Did Israel tell you in advance?
No.
So you were caught by surprise, sir?
I'm never surprised by anything, especially when it comes to the Middle East.
Let's bring in Jumana Brzezinski in Dubai. Jumana, how did the attack unfold?
Yeah, well, President Trump says that he's not surprised by anything, especially when it comes to the Middle East. I will tell you, this was a major surprise for the region, particularly for Qatar. Yesterday, around 4 p.m. in the afternoon, smoke was seen rising from a residential neighborhood close to schools and embassies. Unclear what had happened, what the cause of the explosion was, but shortly afterwards, the IDF put out a statement saying that they had conducted a military strike targeting senior Hamas officials, senior negotiators. It was not till a couple of hours later that Hamas then put out a statement saying that 5 party members had been killed, but that the chief negotiators had actually been spared. So perhaps perceived to be an unsuccessful assassination attempt. Now, the response from the Qataris has been very angry. We heard from Sheikh Mohammed, the Prime Minister, late last night, and he did not mince his words. He likened this to an attack of a state terror. He said that it was a violation of their sovereignty, their airspace, also of moral standards, because it is unheard of for a nation to be attacked as both a host and a mediator for negotiations, in addition for a negotiating team to be attacked. Condemnation has come through from Arab states as well, yet to get a full statement from the U.S., but President Trump said he was not thrilled with what happened, though, and this is a quote, eliminating Hamas is a worthy goal in his eyes.
Ljungman, Qatar, of course, has been working with the U.S. to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. So where does this leave the talks now?
Well, this is a huge diplomatic setback, and not least because from the Qataris' perspective, they want to be guaranteed that an attack like this will not happen again, particularly in light of it being actually unsuccessful. And so the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Majid Al-Ansari, he also put out a statement yesterday saying that they're engaging with the U.S. now to get guarantees that an attack, a repeated attack, will not happen again. But at the same time, you have to square that up against the comments coming through from the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, this morning, saying that Israel's security policy is clear. They will act against enemies everywhere. There is no place where they can hide. So real concern here about the diplomatic efforts and whether there actually can be a chance of a breakthrough on the ceasefire proposal that the U.S. had put forward to both sides in the last week. And by the way, just the irony of all of this is the Hamas negotiators were actually conducting a discussion vis-a-vis the U.S. ceasefire proposal when the attack took place. So unclear at this point whether there can be or will be a breakthrough, and indeed whether the key mediator, Qatar, has the momentum to continue.
Ljungman, thanks so much. Ljungman Bersachi there joining us from Dubai. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has also named longtime ally Sébastien Lecornu to be the country's new prime minister. Lecornu's minority government will need tacit support to pass a 2026 budget. Well, joining us now is Famke Krumbmüller, EMEA leader in the Geostrategic business group at EY-Parthenon. Famke, as always, thank you for joining us. I mean, Geostrategic feels like the main thing that we're covering today. First of all, how difficult will it be for Sébastien Lecornu? He starts today. It's his first day in office. There are mass protests to push through some of these budget reforms that have been very unpopular.
Yeah, morning, Francine. So, I think the bottom line is that ultimately nothing has changed in France. Lecornu is facing the exact same situation that his predecessors have faced. So same parliament, same tensions, same challenges. And so that leads to the conclusion that he will face the exact same difficulty finding majorities, let alone passing a budget or even, and we're not even talking about that, any type of a tiny bit more of ambitious reforms.
So what happens next?
So he will try and find majorities. The reason that how President Macron justifies that he has been appointed is that he is close to the existing coalitions between the center and the center-right, but the socialists, etc., are already saying, and the RN, the far-right, are saying that they're already not happy with this. So that's why I'm pointing to the fact that we're in the same situation as before. Majority is difficult to find, and then they will have to. The main challenge and the main focus will be passing a budget. To be clear, there is no government shutdown in France as we know it, as we can know it from other countries. So they can roll over last year's budget to next year's, but they will try and pass a budget, and that will be the focus over the next couple of months.
Famke, as you rightly put it, it's very clear, it seems very clear for the moment, certainly day one, that rival parties show little willingness for concessions. But if there's nothing, I mean, is it prime minister after prime minister, or will there be, elections called by President Macron? Could he even resign?
Well, that's a great question, Francine. So he could, at this stage, call for early legislative elections again. The challenge is, and I think everybody does see this in France right now, is that there is no expectation that this will yield a different result or any type of result that would solve the situation. So I think it's unlikely at this stage that he will again call early legislative elections. And then the other options, and some parties are calling for this, is for his resignation and early presidential elections. I feel like that's even less likely. So the expectation right now is that we would continue in the current situation until the next presidential elections, which are in 2027.
Famke, if we look at security in Europe in general, we just had a terrific briefing from our Oliver Crook on the fact that Poland shot down drones that crossed into its territory during a Russian airstrike on Ukraine. I mean, this feels like a big incursion of European airspace, probably one of the most serious violations since the war began. What do you think happens next? Is there a will to de-escalate, or could it be ramped up very quickly?
I do think, and like in the first time that this happened, as was mentioned at the very beginning of the war, it's in nobody's interest to further escalate, even though, of course, the Europeans need to clearly send the signal that they will defend their space, which is something that von der Leyen has already said this morning. I think just allow me to tie it back to France. It's a really good example of how problematic it is that France, as the biggest foreign policy power in the European Union, and one of the biggest in Europe, is so preoccupied with the domestic situation. The president is weakened, and there's not really a government. So it just shows how problematic this is.
I mean, do we know if it was intentional or accidental, and is that really the deciding factor on what happens next?
I don't think at this stage we know, and even if security services at some stage will find out, it's not necessarily going to be made public, I believe. I think it will be a political decision how much this will get escalated or not. And again, it's in nobody's interest to escalate this significantly, I would think, at this stage.
Famke, I mean, I know you're a great student of also U.S.-European relations. How does that change what Donald Trump will be doing towards Russia?
That is a very difficult question, Francine, because as we know, Donald Trump has been trying to work on a ceasefire from all different perspectives, sometimes to the big surprise of the Europeans. He came into his presidency promising that he would end the war in Ukraine. Clearly, that has proved much more difficult. I think some observers thought that he was going to lose patience a little earlier. He has not yet. I think there's many different ways that this can go, and I find it incredibly difficult to predict. The one thing that I will say, and that I think is important, is that even if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine, and we're obviously even far away from that, then that will not equal the end of the war. And I think that's just very important to keep in mind.
Famke, thanks so much. Famke Krumbmüller there from the Geostrategic Business Group at EY-Parthenon. Coming up, Klarna prepares to go public. We'll speak to one of the early investors in the Buy Now, Pay Later company. We'll be speaking to Mattias Ljungman. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Russian escalation. Poland shoots down drones that crossed into its territory during another massive Russian airstrike on neighboring Ukraine, calling it an act of aggression. President Trump says he's unhappy with Israel after it carried out airstrikes on Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital, Doha. Plus, AI optimism. Oracle skyrockets pre-market as it stuns Wall Street with an aggressive outlook for cloud revenues. So also looking at Novo Nordisk's shares gaining this morning after the Danish pharma giant said it will cut 11% of its global workforce by the end of next year. The company will shed 9,000 jobs and also make its third cut of the year in its profit forecast. The Ozempic and Wegovy manufacturer is fighting to recover ground lost in the obesity drug market to rival Eli Lilly. So back to some of our top stories, and Oracle shares have surged pre-market after the company posted a major increase in bookings and gave an aggressive outlook for its cloud infrastructure business. Known for its database software, the company is on track to add about $190 billion to its market value if its stock gains continue in today's session. Well, for more, let's bring in our global tech editor, Peter Elstrom. Peter, I mean, we woke up and then we looked pre-market like 31 minutes ago, and it was up 30%. I mean, 30% is massive for Oracle.
We did not expect this news to be coming out of Oracle this quarter. Yeah, this morning we're looking at gains that could be as much as 30%. They could gain, if the gains hold at this point during the market trading, could be $200 billion in additional market cap. Larry Ellison is now challenging Elon Musk as perhaps the richest person in the world. And as you say, this is for a database company, a company that we think of as a database company that really hasn't been that sexy over the past few years. But what you're seeing really is they are really capitalizing on the AI boom and this incredible investment in AI infrastructure in particular. They have what the equivalent of their bookings. They talked about $455 billion in bookings at the end of the quarter. That's 4x what it had been just a year before. They're benefiting tremendously from these build-outs, particularly OpenAI is one of their key partners. OpenAI is talking about spending trillions of dollars on infrastructure around the world, $500 billion in the U.S. So they're really capitalizing on that, and it looks like they're going to be benefiting financially for a few years to come.
So, Peter, again, I mean, it sometimes, it blows hot and cold on whether AI will go as fast as we think. And then you have something like Oracle, talking about the cloud business, and you think maybe it's even faster than certainly Wall Street priced in. Where are we on like AI adoption?
Well, the companies that are competing for those AI customers are spending very, very aggressively now. So OpenAI, Google is certainly in that camp. You're seeing many others trying to capitalize. Meta is spending all this money on AI salaries in particular. So those companies are making the investments, and Oracle is one of the big beneficiaries of those investments. It's partnering with OpenAI. It also partners with TikTok and some of the others on the infrastructure that you need to be able to run these services. We still need to see whether demand is on the other end of these trillions of dollars investments. Our customers, our individuals and corporations, are they going to pay that money to be able to justify these kinds of investments? That we don't know yet.
Peter, are we excited about the new Apple? Like iPhone, it's tiny, right? It's like 5.6 millimeters.
You tell me.
I mean, look, as a lady, I have small handbags. Yes, I'm quite excited, but I don't know if it's a game changer for them.
It's their thinnest, it's their lightest. It looks very different. So if you want to see something different, Apple's been criticized for making kind of incremental improvements with the iPhones in recent years. Now we're at the iPhone 17, and you get this Air iPhone. It does look quite different. There are some compromises. The battery life is a little bit shorter. Apple says it's going to last a complete day. We still need to see whether that's in fact the case. Also, there's only one camera on the back of it. It's not quite as powerful in that sense as what we've seen in the past. Now, on the other hand, the iPhone 17 Pro and the iPhone 17 have also made some significant improvements. So Apple is hoping that this is going to be the year that they persuade consumers like you to actually spend the money and buy a new iPhone.
I'm not sure about the camera thing. I'm not sure. I need like full HD.
They have a new selfie mode. Apparently, it's a much easier selfie mode.
Okay,
so you can
we're going to try it, Peter. That's going to be our 2025 thing. Peter Elstrom, our executive editor for global technology. Now let's turn to Klarna's market debut with shares in the buy now, pay later company to start trading in New York later today. The Swedish company priced its IPO at $40 a share for an implied market value of just over $15 billion. Well, joining us now, Mattias Ljungman, founder and managing partner of venture capital firm Moonfire Ventures. Mattias invested in Klarna in the firm's early growth phase. Mattias, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this is exciting for you. Congratulations, because you spotted a jewel. A lot of people have been trying to catch up with Klarna, actually. I mean, the payment system, it's unthinkable to think that this is a fairly new company and that we didn't have that option a couple of years ago.
I mean, look, it's a huge moment. And, congratulations to Klarna and the team who's built it up, the founders, these resilient, conviction-driven, super tenacious that are now bringing their company to market. And, they've built a parallel payment rails, ultimately. And if you compare it then to sort of Visa and MasterCard, who are, Visa 660 billion, and you have MasterCard smaller in size, but they have built that alternative for e-commerce, and they did it 20 years ago, and at that time we have to, like you said, think back. At that moment, people were still worried about paying for things online. So getting the product first and then paying for it later was actually a super great innovation to build trust and build reputation within the industry.
Mattias, I mean, I guess there's a lot of soul searching in Europe right now.
Yeah.
What do you think does it mean for the European markets, given they decided to list in the U.S.?
For me, this is a moment again for Klarna thinking about how they can really take advantage of the opportunity in front of them. They're building out, like they're new. They're in early innings, really, in the U.S. And so being in the U.S., IPOing in the U.S. makes a lot of sense for the brand recognition, reputation, and then they can benefit from what is a much, much larger stock market, larger economy, and so allow them to raise more capital in the future and so on. So to me, it's great news, and we should just really celebrate that we have been able to achieve that. And to be honest, there's a whole bunch of other companies that are on its way. We have Revolut, we have Monzo, we have others. So there's a lot to be proud of in Europe in terms of what we've done in the fintech space. Let's not forget also Adyen, and I like to always say that the Stripe founders are actually Irish. Let's not forget that.
But does it depend on where they list?
Sorry?
Does it depend on where they list? I mean, how do you measure success?
To me, it's ultimately how you build a fantastic business. The founders are focused upon what they can do for the consumer. What they also can now, with Klarna, do for the merchants. And for the consumers, they're not just the payment rails. They've added a lot more. It's a bigger experience. You have rewards. You have loyalty that they're adding in. You have discovery. And you have choice. Really at that moment, you say, okay, should I pay for it now? Should I do that later? Should I have something that's interest-bearing? It's really, really powerful. So they're doing something more than just payments. They're taking it a step further.
So, Mattias, what would you concretely like to see from Klarna actually go from now?
Well, I just love the passion and vision of Sebastian. Like, he just keeps going. Like, he is relentless. And so I would always back him. I'd back him again because he is just going to keep fighting. And so the innovation that he's going to see going forward is, again, he's working on that neobank, doing more for the consumer. On the merchant side, he's also innovating, because they can understand in detail the purchasing behavior. They can offer unique deals for those customers, which, and if anything, the main thing that they've been great at is ensuring that cart, the cart that they have that is not abandoned, that they're actually converting them. And so it's a great ROI tool, and they're taking on the risk, from the merchants.
Mattias, what initially did you see in Klarna that made you want to invest in them? Was it the founder or the business model? And how can you replicate that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's a bit of both. Like the founders are exceptional. Really exciting group of people. Three guys who met at university, super ambitious, wanted to take on the world, and they actually ended up doing it. It's a wonderful story. And Sebastian, he's he's an immigrant, first generation Swede, so it's a great story of success. So that was really compelling. And Sebastian has proven himself to really have that tenacity and capability and the spike that you need to just keep going. I can't see him stopping, to be honest. But then also it was really exciting to see that business model, how they thought about the payment rails in a very different way, and also thought about the consumer and what they could do for the consumer and the merchants.
Mattias, are there other companies, maybe one company with a similar profile that you'd back right now?
Well, I mean, I think we should be very excited about Revolut and what they're doing. And in some ways, I think, Nick at Revolut and Sebastian, they have a lot in common. They're just, super tenacious people. So that's really exciting on the sort of public market side. But at the other level, today, I'm just so surprised in terms of the growth that we're seeing in companies. There's a whole cohort of companies today that within 4 years are able to achieve 100 million in revenue, in what is a very short period of time. And in that we have, the companies like Lovable. We also have 11 Labs. We have a company within our portfolio, Filigrand, and there's a whole bunch of other ones that are coming through. So that's a whole step change in terms of what's happening in the sort of European ecosystem.
So interesting, Mattias. Thank you so much. As always, so great to have you in the studio. Mattias Ljungman, there, founder and managing partner of Moonfire Ventures. Now, of course, we'll have a lot more on tech throughout the week. Don't forget the next episode of Bloomberg Tech Europe this Friday, 6:30 a.m. London time. Tom McKenzie will be looking at how AI is changing the way we fight disease, including an exclusive interview with Demis Hassabis, the chief executive of Isomorphic Labs and Google DeepMind. Coming up, we'll talk to Myron Brilliant, the former head of international affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, about Trump's tariffs. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. And you can watch the full interview with the Finnish president this Friday at 5:30 p.m. in the UK, 7 p.m. Eastern in the US. You can also watch it on Bloomberg, the website, and on the terminal from 9 a.m. London time on Friday. It's the first episode of 6 episodes of season 1 of Leaders with Francine Lacqua and myself, where I sit down with the decision makers shaping our future to explore the personal stories behind their public personas. Now, the Finnish leader spoke to me about living in Russia's shadow. And of course, the threat from Moscow has taken a new turn with a Russian drone incursion in Poland. As European defense ministers gathered here in London, discussions will be dominated by the escalating conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. Our Europe executive editor, Chad Thomas, joins us, also to talk trade, France, but also defense. Myron Brilliant, the former head of international affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and founder of the Brilliant Impact Group. So thank you both for joining us. Chad, this is uncertain. A lot of people will be thinking, like, look, we had this incursion of drones into Poland. Prime Minister Tusk said there were about 3 or 4. There were, I think, the numbers are quite high that they had to stop. Is this an escalation? Was this done on purpose?
It is an escalation, and you have Poland saying that this is an act of aggression. This is the first time that we've seen them shooting down drones that have gone over their airspace. We had, Francine, just about 30 minutes ago, the Prime Minister Donald Tusk speaking in the Polish Parliament. He said that he is going to invoke Article 4, which most of us speak about Article 5. That's where you're asking for military intervention. It's not that, so it's lower than that, but it is a significant escalation. Article 4 is asking NATO members to have consultations to talk about what's happening. Do they need to cooperate more closely on military matters? There is a NATO meeting that was set for today anyway, so they've already said at that meeting that they're already going to be discussing what happened overnight in Poland.
Will we ever really know if it's intentional or accidental? And what's the White House saying on it? Well,
that's going to be the million-dollar question here. We had Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, saying that she believed that it was intentional. Obviously, we're waiting to hear what Russia has to say about it, and the White House, they'll be surely waking up any moment, and we'll hearing more from them.
And Myron, this comes at a tricky time because Europe is, first of all, not always on the same page right now. You have Donald Trump that's much more friendly to Russia, but then also talked, tougher on tariff threats towards Russia. So how does this change the dynamics?
Well, I think Chad's absolutely right, Francine. I think it escalates things for the president. He's dealing with not only the rising tensions in Europe, but also now in the Middle East coming out of yesterday. He was definitely surprised in Qatar. And he's concerned, obviously, about Putin's aggression. And this is the whole fear to begin with, that the conflict in Ukraine would spill over to the rest of Europe. So while we're not there yet, we're certainly moving towards an escalation of the crisis. So I think the president's got a lot on his hands. Yep. Obviously, the EU and the United States have to deal with NATO security, have to deal with Ukraine, and also trade tensions. And it's a lot on the plate.
Does it put the president closer to Europe? Because there were question marks about, he also rolled the red carpet out in Alaska for Vladimir Putin. If Russia's going behind his back to do this, then is he going to give more support to Ukraine?
Well, Europe is trying to stay close to the president. I mean, look at it post the visit in Alaska with Putin. What happens, right? Zelensky comes to town, and Zelensky doesn't come alone. A lot of EU leaders come with him. What's the message? Europe does not want a gap between what the United States is thinking about in the Middle East or in Europe with respect to these issues. So clearly, the United States and Europe have to work together. Transatlantic ties have to be stronger than ever, but they're being tested, and there is tension, and trade is a part of it. I mean, look at the polling in Europe right now about the U.S.-EU trade deal. It's not very favorable.
No, it's not very favorable, and actually you have quite weak heads of state in Europe, right? So we saw a change of prime minister in France. The situation is still quite unstable because of fiscal issues, and other countries just don't feel as strong as they were in the past.
Well, if you look at what's happening in France right now, they're very inward focused. They're focusing on their domestic issues. They have to. They have huge budgetary problems, and they can't get a budget through the parliament. I don't see how the new prime minister is much more successful than the last two before that. I'm, as you know, based in Berlin normally. In Germany, we have a new government with 3 parties in it. They already are fighting with one another after only a couple of months in power. So is difficult to see how Europe unites around these very difficult topics that they have to deal with.
Yeah, and how can they unite, especially in the threats? Donald Trump asked him yesterday to be much tougher on China.
Well, the one thing I would say to add to Chad's answer here is that certainly Macron's made an effort with the Chancellor in Germany. This is the one area, the foreign policy area, is the one area where Macron still has legs, right, to run. He's definitely concerned about the domestic environment. The Prime Minister will have to deal with the budget, and there's obviously opposition to budget cuts, pension cuts. But in the foreign policy space, I think Macron's been pretty aggressive. The question is, how effective has he been?
Right.
And I would argue his effectiveness in dealing with the President of the United States has been pretty limited as his position's gotten weaker. At the end of the day, Europe and the United States have to stand together. And whether that's dealing with Ukraine and coming to some common alignment on security guarantees, certainly we've seen a lot of talk about defense sovereignty in Europe. That's a direction that's going to have to happen. But the United States can't remove itself from helping support what's needed in Europe at this moment.
Myron, do they have to stand together? If you have a president, even on the tariffs and trades, if you have a president that gives the UK a better deal than the EU as a whole, then is it the New World Order? Does Europe need to, not by choice, but by fact, look for new allies?
Well, I'm no fan of dismantling a global trade system that the United States and Europe put together, right? I've been on record saying that I would not weaponize tariffs, and I certainly wouldn't throw everything into a kitchen and cabinet sink and hope that it comes out on the other side. So I am very concerned about what's happened on the trade front. The EU-US deal is a pretty good deal for both Europe and the United States because it brings some stability and predictability. But it's certainly a big question mark about where we go from here. And there are other issues. How are we going to deal with AI and digital taxation? How are we going to deal with the broader issues of China and manage China, which was your earlier question? If we can't get alignment. Now, Germany will be a big part of that because Germany cares about the auto market. And the United States and Germany and France and other countries are going to have to come together to manage the China dynamic. And we are concerned.
I think part of the challenge for someone like Macron, he can talk tough, but he doesn't have the money, the fiscal space to do very much when it comes to helping with security. The country that I watch closely in this space would be Germany, because they actually can afford to spend if they want to. Merz has said he's going to spend what he needs to on defense. They haven't really put numbers behind that yet, but we'll be watching from our perspective very closely, where does that money go and what does that mean for the defense industry in Europe and the European defense as a result of that.
And whether or not Germany is going to buy everything from France in this equation.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's what that would help the defense industry, would help Macron's politics. But I think there's a U.S. defense industry. And by the way, who knows? Maybe Donald Trump has a stake in Lockheed one day and other defense companies, and therefore we're going to be doing.
I mean, France and Germany can't reach an agreement on fighter jets, so it's really difficult to see how ultimately people still think in terms of their countries.
Francine, go ahead.
There are just a little bit of headlines actually coming in from the RIA saying that Russia's top diplomat has been summoned to the Polish foreign ministry. Myron, I also wanted to touch on, von der Leyen, the Commission president, gave a big speech today. And if you look at some of the key takeaways, it's very aggressive, where delivered. There needs to be support for Europe's eastern flank against Putin, holding Israel to account, talking about frozen Russian assets, and saying there needs to be a pushback against Donald Trump. On those, what can Europe actually deliver, given where they are economically?
Not much without the United States' support, in my view. Both Europe and the United States have to sanction Russian activity, right? And the United States is moving now to sanction India and China with secondary tariffs. They have less capacity. We've already done a number of sanctions on Russia. What we have to do is just stay united in defending Ukraine's rights, making sure that a land for peace deal is one that Ukraine can accept, and we have to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. That's ultimately what has to happen. The one thing I want to watch, though, that we haven't gotten to is the president's authority over trade and tariffs, because we have a court in the United States. We have a U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Let's see what happens before the Supreme Court. Do they agree with the lower court's decision that the president exceeded his authority over tariffs? If it does, now what happens to the trade deals that the United States has reached? Yeah. And what does that mean for Europe and UK and others? It creates more instability. There's a whole set of questions there, but it might rein in the president's authority.
All right, what does happen? So do they crawl, do country by country, do they show up and say, actually, I want my money back on this and present the Trump administration with a list?
So the president has appealed, the administration has appealed the lower court, the Court of Appeals decision. In November, the Supreme Court will have hearings, and they're expediting. Typically, a Supreme Court case wouldn't show up until June of next year. But there's hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff revenue. There's a big uncertainty. So whether you're the Treasury Secretary or whether you're the White House, you're very worried about the impact of this on the trade agenda for the administration. So I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. It could limit the authority. It could support the lower court's decision. It could have a sort of a hybrid decision. It could say widespread utilization of tariffs is not authorized under IEPA. Or it could say that targeted but not widespread. So there's a lot of options here. Yeah. We're going to have to see. But to your point, there's a lot of questions about refunds.
Yeah,
right?
refunds and then fiscal holds, right?
Refunds and fiscal challenges associated with, losing maybe a couple hundred, $400, $500 billion of revenue.
Then how do you fund the beautiful big bill? Myron, thanks so much. Thank you to Myron Brilliant, founder of the Brilliant Impact Group and former head of international, of course, affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and our very own Chad Thomas. Up next, Bloomberg Brief.